In October 2019, Grayson Santos visited a Spirit Halloween store to buy a gift for his girlfriend. Once inside, an employee convinced him to buy a curious-looking glass pumpkin. He took it home and planned to give it to his girlfriend when he saw her next. Only, soon afterward, a series of horrific events unfolded. Ones that went beyond the boundaries of mere coincidence and left Grayson convinced he was either losing his mind or the horrific happenings were down to something else, that they were somehow linked to the glass pumpkin he'd bought from Spirit Halloween. Go back a few weeks, and if someone had said to me back then, "Hey, I bought this tchotchke from Spirit and I swear it's cursed," then yeah, I would have been the first one to tell them that they were crazy. Only I ended up being the crazy one. But the problem is, how do you prove that the sick, messed up shit going on in your life, it's down to a freaking pumpkin of all things? It sounds laughable, and it would be if it wasn't so horrific. But I can't prove it. It's cursed, and in being so, now I'm cursed too. I was in the outlet mall parking lot waiting for my mom to finish her shopping. She couldn't drive for a year because she just had another seizure. So on my days off work, I drove her around places. I didn't mind doing this. I liked helping my mom out, but I did find shopping tedious. I usually killed time in my car listening to music or listening to podcasts, but today, my phone battery died, and there seemed to be some sort of issue with my car charging point. I didn't know how long my mom would be, but I was so bored. I looked at the store directly in front of me where I was parked, Spirit Halloween. The orange sign with the cloaked skeleton looked kinda kooky and, well, my girlfriend Maisie, she sure loved kooky. She was about to visit me from college that weekend, and suddenly, the thought of buying her something sweet seemed like a great idea. So I got out of my car and I walked into the store. It was just as you'd expect it to be. Rows and rows of Halloween costumes and masks from Jason to Ghostface. Creepy gargoyles, electronic tombstones that creaked as you passed them, and giant skeletons that rattled their chain-laden arms. I walked past as much of the noise and cheap plastic as I could stand. I went toward the back. Small dishes, shaped like cat faces, a witch's hand jewelry stand, cuddly ghosts, bat cushions, and pumpkins. So many pumpkins. I acted like most guys my age would and stood there, overwhelmed by the sheer amount of velvet and sequins. I was at the point where I was just going to grab the closest thing to me and run when I heard this weird humming sound behind me. I can't tell you what that tune was, only that it sounded familiar. I turned and I saw this girl standing there in the Spirit employee t-shirt. In an almost daydreamy type voice, she smiled at me and said, "Can I help you?" I told her that I was looking for a gift for my girlfriend, and she gave this playful smile and bent down to her knees and rummaged at the back of the lowest shelf, pulling out pumpkins until she reached this one. It was a translucent, white glass pumpkin. It seemed to twinkle in the artificial light, and I found myself wondering why on earth it was hidden at the bottom of the bag. I told her that would be great. I thanked her and I carefully took it from her, and she gave me this exaggerated grin. She rubbed her wrist where I spotted a purple rose tattoo, and then as she hummed that familiar tune that I still couldn't place, she walked over to the cart full of stuff. Now at the cash register, the guy couldn't find a price, so he rang through at the same price as a similar one. It seemed like no big deal at the time. I went over to my car where I spotted my mom waiting for me with dozens of shopping bags by her feet. I rushed over to her and I apologized for keeping her waiting as I fumbled to hold the pumpkin, open the trunk, and put her shopping bags in there, and I was just juggling too much. So it was no shock when the pumpkin tumbled out of my grip and fell onto the concrete ground with a thud. I stared down at it, expecting to find a puzzle of pieces. I mean, the thing was made out of transparent soda glass, but to both mine and my mom's surprise, it was intact. And on inspection, it didn't have as much as a scratch on it. Now, I tried to pass it to my mom to hold, but she just stared at it with furrowed brows and told me there was something off about it. She point-blank refused to touch it. This wasn't new. My mom was one of those people who got weird vibes about anything from clothes to cars. She'd thrown out brand new dresses and even switched cars because of it. I shrugged, placed it in the trunk, and then I drove my mom home. I didn't think anything else about that pumpkin until I got home and I placed it on my breakfast bar so I wouldn't forget to give it to Maisie. But if I'd known then what messed up stuff was about to go down because of that pumpkin, then I would have done everything in my power to destroy that thing. But back then, I didn't know. It would have been too late anyway. Thinking about it, I think I was cursed as soon as I touched it. I made some dinner. I called Maisie and then I watched some TV. It was getting late, so I took my dirty plate into the kitchen, but as I switched the light on, I saw something inside of the pumpkin. Something alive. Some sort of bug, like a beetle or a centipede. It was long and curled up, its legs and antennae twitching within its translucent prison. I swore loudly and I dropped the plate, which made me swear even more. The glass pumpkin didn't have a lid or any way of getting inside its hollow interior. Something being trapped inside of it. It just didn't make any sense. Feeling completely freaked out, I stepped over the now broken plate so I could get into the cupboard under the sink, where I found some rubber gloves. Now I put them on, and with my heart thudding like crazy, I psyched myself up to pick up the pumpkin with that thing inside it, and then, with outstretched arms, I carried it out to the trash can outside. I threw that thing in there along with the gloves, I closed the lid, and then went back inside and cleaned up. Just thinking about that crawling, squirming insect gave me the heebie-jeebies. I'd always hated insects, but that was something else. I'd never seen one like that before. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. As much as I racked my brain, there was just no logical explanation for how that thing had gotten inside of the pumpkin. My skin felt so itchy, as if my mind was tricking me that the insect was now on me. I scratched and I itched at my skin and flinched and jerked about in bed. It was exhausting. I must have burned myself out and drifted off because the next thing I knew, I felt this squirming, wriggling sensation on my neck. As I was only half awake, I instinctively went to flick whatever it was off me, and I felt spindly legs, a smooth shell, and something slimy. I shot upward. I flinched until it fell off me and scrambled to turn on my bedside light. There, climbing up my bedroom wall, was that thing that had been in the pumpkin. It was long, about the length of my entire arm, and it stank. This wretched, rotten smell. It had been crawling across my neck. I can't explain how unnerving that was. I grabbed my phone and I ran out of the bedroom, making sure the door was shut behind me, and I was cursing and freaking out as I walked into the kitchen and I saw it there, on the exact spot of the breakfast bar it had been in earlier, was the translucent white glass pumpkin. there was this layer of this gross yellow goo on my neck and my face, and I scrubbed it. I scrubbed it off my skin until it was red raw. And then I went into the living room and I sat there for hours, flinching at every little creak and trying to work out what the heck was going on. Someone had been playing a prank on me, but who? Only my mom knew about the pumpkin, and she wasn't exactly the pranking kind. Besides, she lived 40 blocks away and she didn't have a car. It's funny how your mind reacts to stuff like this. I know I'd put the pumpkin in the trash, yet I started telling myself maybe I just imagined doing it. But in the end, it just felt easier to accept this fabrication that I knew was baloney rather than accepting the truth. I decided I'd return the pumpkin tomorrow and I'd get a refund. I slept on the couch. No way I was going back in my room and dealing with that creepy thing right now. At sunrise, I called my friend Dale and I told him that I had some sort of mutant bug in my room and I needed his help dealing with it. He sounded groggy like he'd just woken up, but he said, "Yeah, man, whatever you need." I picked a glass pumpkin up and I flung it in my rucksack and I put it in the passenger footwell side of my car. Now, on reaching Dale's, I explained what was going on, and I said I needed to stop by the store first, and he just laughed, and then he lifted my bag by his feet, and he pulled out the pumpkin. He spun it in his hands, and he told me it looked pretty normal to him. He waited there. As I went inside the store and over to the customer service desk, I placed that pumpkin on the counter, and I told that guy behind the desk, "Give me my refund." He just looked at the item, and then he looked at me and he asked to see a receipt. I searched my jacket pocket, the same one I'd been wearing when I'd bought the pumpkin, so if it was going to be anywhere, it'd be crumpled in one of these pockets. I pulled all the receipts out. I checked them. None of them matched. I asked him if he could check the security footage. I even waved my banking app at him to show my transaction. He just shook his head and he said, "Hey man, no receipt, no refund. That's store policy." No way was I taking that thing back home. So I told him it didn't matter. They could have it back for free. I turned and I bolted out of there. When I got outside, my heart was beating so quickly I had to go around the corner of the store to catch my breath. I soon started laughing. I honestly thought I'd got rid of that damn pumpkin, and now the nightmare would end. It felt like Christmas for a moment. Yeah, how wrong I was. I couldn't escape the spirit of Halloween. I'd been outside for about 5 minutes when I returned to my car. I got inside and I started apologizing to Dale for being longer than I thought. Before I finished talking, I saw it on his lap. That translucent glass pumpkin, it was shimmering in the light as if it was openly mocking me. I stared at it and him in disbelief, and I asked him, "What the heck is going on?" He shrugged, and he told me a girl in a Spirit employee t-shirt had knocked on the window and told him his friend had forgotten this. I asked him to describe that girl, but he couldn't remember any more other than she was cute. I told him I didn't want it, and he laughed at me. He said that it was fine, that he'd give it to his mom or something, and that I needed to chill out. Yeah, that was easy for him to say. He hadn't spent the night trying to avoid a mutant bug. I couldn't stop staring at that pumpkin. As I drove, I was convinced that the mutant insect would crawl out of it and wriggle across me as I drove. I was just trying to focus and not accidentally skip a red light when, out of nowhere, Dale shrieked. He dropped the pumpkin into the footwell and he started furiously wiping his clothes as if he had something on them. He was so erratic that he knocked into me bumping the steering wheel and suddenly sending the car veering into the wrong side of the road. I grabbed onto the wheel and I turned and I braked and I don't know what else, but through some miracle, the huge truck coming toward us seemed to miss hitting us. As that truck horn echoed past us, I turned to Dale, who now had stripped down to just his pants and was scratching at his bare arms and chest. He looked at me with pure fear and he said, "The blood, it's everywhere. Look, it's covering everything." I pulled over and then I looked directly at him and I told him there was no blood and he needed to stop. But he just kept on scratching at his skin until it began to swell and bleed. After a few minutes, he looked around him in confusion and he said that the blood had gone and it didn't make sense. He was adamant that he had seen the inside of that pumpkin fill with blood. And then the next thing he knew, it was spilling out all over him. I kept telling him there's no blood, and there never had been, but he was shaken up. I dropped him off at home, and as he wiped at his skin and skittishly looked around, he told me, don't contact him for a while. None of this was adding up, so when I got home, I threw that pumpkin in the back of the cupboard. I grabbed a baseball bat, and I went into my bedroom to deal with that bug. I was shaking as I edged open the door. I was convinced it was going to leap out and attach itself to me like something out of Alien. I stepped inside, unable to see it anywhere. And then I got down on my knees and I checked under the bed, pressing my hands to the metal frame. I felt something crawl across my fingers, and I let out a scream of pure fear. I was so freaked out, I dropped the baseball bat, and I seemed to freeze. That insect was crawling across my hand, tickling my skin as it left that gooey yellow substance on me. As I was running out of there, I heard a knock on my front door. I opened it in a panic, and I saw my next-door neighbor standing there. He'd heard my screams, and he asked me what was wrong. I dragged him into my room, and I told him to check something out. I pointed at that bug that was now crawling across my bed, leaving that weird, almost yellow, slimy substance behind it. He looked confused, so I asked him if he saw it, and he shook his head, and he said, "No, I don't see anything." He told me I should get some sleep, and I just nodded in agreement. I showed him out, and then I shut the bedroom door, jamming a chair in front of it to make sure that thing couldn't get out. I went for a long walk to try to process all of this. I started to piece it all together. I rang my mom and I asked her, "Has anything weird been happening? Or have you been seeing any strange visions?" She said something. It caused the hair on the back of my neck to prickle. "It's the glass pumpkin, isn't it?" I asked her what she meant by this, and she said she didn't know. She just knew something wasn't right about it, and she regretted not making me return it as soon as she'd seen it. I told her I'd tried to return it, but the store wouldn't let me. I said that it was fine and I'd sort it out. I didn't want to worry her any more than I had. It was only me and Dale who had touched the pumpkin and the spirit staff, and now me and Dale were experiencing horrors that only we could sense. I knew I had to end this, so I went back home. I grabbed the heavy metal clock off the hallway wall, and I moved that chair away from the bedroom door, and I charged in there, fueled on pure adrenaline. The insect was crawling across the wall, and I ran at it, and I bashed it with the clock again and again. And then I swished the clock out from my baseball bat I'd left in there, and I bashed it I bashed it until yellow goo and bits of shell splattered across the now dented wall. I laughed and I slumped down onto the floor, convinced the nightmare is finally over. I cleaned up, I left that pumpkin hidden in the cupboard, and I moved on with my life. I thought that was it, but I was a fool for thinking that. Of course it wasn't over. Not yet. A few days later, after Maisie stayed the night, she was making pancakes while I was taking a shower. I walked out to the sweet smell of syrup and I made a comment about how good it smelled. Suddenly, this rancid, rotten smell overtook the entire room. I froze dead when I saw her standing in front of the breakfast bar, holding that glass pumpkin in her hand. She looked at me and she said, "Grayson, this is so cute. Did you get this for me?" In a shaky voice, I asked her where she found that, and she said it was right there on the breakfast bar. I went to take it from her, but as I went to grab it, I saw it appear in the middle of the pumpkin. The long, squirming, crawled-up bug was slowly unraveling itself and crawling through the glass, crawling toward me. Both Dale and Maisie claimed to see things, terrifying visions. They were both medicated, but the visions didn't stop. To this day, they spend their lives in and out of mental hospitals. As for Grayson, every year, between the months of August and November, he drives across the country holding a translucent white glass pumpkin and searching for her, the girl with the purple rose tattoo. I know this because Grayson is my son. I see him tormented by visions only he can see. They appear out of nowhere and they control his life. He will never stop searching until he has found that girl who gave it to him and returned it to her. A girl with a purple rose tattoo on her wrist. It doesn't matter how long it takes or how many states we have to visit. We will never stop until we have ended this nightmare. For more scary, horror, and Halloween stories, please subscribe.